Why did he decide to do this?
Yeah, such a great question, and one that I was asking myself so much as I made that decision. I yeah, I mean, the some of the greatest things that I had being at that firm was, and some of the greatest lessons I learned were around team culture, team health, um, doing business with a people-centric approach, prioritizing emotional connection, prioritizing, yeah, joyful service is how I would describe it.
Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it. On this episode of Into the Unknown, I am joined with a very special guest, Andrew Cook. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me on.
I'm really excited to get into our conversation. We had a few conversations before this. Obviously, I was fortunate, and we'll get into that. I was a guest on your podcast, but just how we connected is kind of cool too.
Totally. Yeah. This is going to be fun. I was just saying before we jumped on here how it's going to be a good experience for me. This is my first time being on this side of it. I've interviewed plenty of guests, including you now, and it's always a fun experience, but never have had this experience of getting to share on someone else's. So thank you for that. And yeah, just a crazy connection, I guess, of how we met through your uncle Gary and his wife Jane. Gary and Jane have been long time just family friends of ours through the years, back when I lived in Milwaukee, and we went to church with them, and they just played a huge role in our lives in many ways, in my family. And had him on my podcast actually, because he's a exceptional entrepreneur himself, and it was really fun. And then he said, "Oh, my nephew does what you're doing. You guys should get together." So here we are. The rest is history.
It really is cool, those kind of connections, and as always, shout out Uncle Gary. It's always fun to kind of learn more about people, but again, I think it's so cool with that networking aspect because the second he texted me about, hey, I'm going to connect you with Andrew, I didn't even ask any more questions. Like, all right, sounds great. I'm excited to talk to this person because again, it's that extra level of networking when your uncle, who's someone you admire, respect, and trust, sends you someone. It's like, oh, cool, that'd be really cool. I'm really interested in what they're doing, and of course, with the generation, sometimes they don't always explain exactly what other people are doing. So it's always interesting to see what we really get into. But it is fun, and it's really cool to kind of have that connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a kindred spirit that I feel with you, and even as we talked on the last podcast that we recorded, there's just so much life that comes meeting like-minded people and encouragement. And you are a little bit farther along in the podcast journey than I am, and it's just cool to see what you built and cool to be a part of it on some small level today. So.
Well, Andrew, I appreciate it. And it's funny because I'll talk a little bit about our first conversation, and it literally was a really nice brainstorming session, I think, on both sides, because a lot of times, even guests you have on the podcast, do they really care how this works? Do they care how I schedule my forms or how I have it,
Right.
connected in my Calendly? But it was really fun to talk with you about everything from StreamYard versus Riverside versus what do you use to clip, what are you kind of questions you're asking, how do you get your guests locked in, and all that. So it was really enjoyable to go through. I think we had like a 20-minute call schedule and ended up being like 2.5 hours of us just talking, riffing, asking each other questions. Or, I'm fortunate, as we talked about you about on episode 20, and I just hit episode like I think 151 this week. And so
hmm
130 episodes, I won't say ahead, but at a different place. There's so many things I was fortunate to share with you about, hey, this is how I would have done this differently, or I really would have thought about this. And then kind of seeing what you're doing, there's things that I definitely want to add to what I'm already doing.
hmm Yeah, well, congratulations on 150. I did see that on my feeds earlier today or yesterday, and that's a huge milestone. That's so cool. I can already see the progress from episode 1 to 20 for me, and I can't imagine what the progress will be personally. And again, it's all about my personal growth in so many ways. But like that personal growth, seeing it to episode 150, that's going to be insane. So
I appreciate it. It really is. It's cool to see that growth, as mentioned, from episode one to 20 to 100. And I don't know if I can stomach watching my first few now at this point. It's been a while since I've double clicked into those, but it was fun because what I ended up doing after 150, I hit up every person who I've ever had on the show and just a quick little message, email, because some of them it was kind of a one time thing, kind of the ships passing in the night. They found me on LinkedIn. We haven't really conversated since, but others I've talked to on a regular basis, and it was really cool to just say, "Hey, I'm at 150, and thank you for being a part of that journey." So again, it's always that kind of gratitude and giving thanks when you can.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. You know, another idea that one of my guests gave me, actually, his name was Hugo Dorsey. I think he was guest number, I don't even know, maybe 11 at this point. He was like, when you get to 50 episodes or 100 episodes, Andrew, you should feed all your episodes into AI and then have it create an interview for you and interview yourself essentially for episode number whatever, 150 or 200 or whatever. So yeah, I bet the fans would love to see that from you at some point. I know we touched on a lot of things on when I interviewed you, but on your podcast Into the Unknown, it'd be cool to see something like that. I would assume for your fans. So
The the wheel,
just a little nugget.
the wheels are turning. The wheels are always turning, my friend. So I want to know a little bit
That's
more
great.
about you, though. That origin story, comic book issue number one. Who's Andrew?
Yeah, yeah, happy to share. So, um, yeah, there's so many different dimensions to who I am and where I find myself now. But I guess from a geographical perspective, I have lived several different places over the years. I was born in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, actually, and then was there as a baby. Don't even remember that, but my family is from the Midwest. So my mom is from Wisconsin, Milwaukee area. My dad is from central Minnesota, and so we moved back to the Midwest very quickly after being out in the on the East Coast for a bit, and settled in Milwaukee area for the longest time. When I was growing up in Wisconsin, that's where we were. So basically, probably from 3 to 10, or maybe 2 years old to 10 years old or so in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And then from there, and that's where we had crossed paths with Gary and Jane, as we mentioned previously. But from there, my parents' job changed. They started working for a nonprofit, and that nonprofit started or happened to be based in Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas. So we had never heard of Arkansas at the time, but ended up spending the rest of my time growing up in the state of Arkansas, Central Arkansas, Little Rock area, and then that was huge culture shock, huge adjustment, but really have come to enjoy Arkansas, and my immediate family has stayed in that area since we've all kind of become adults. So I went to school in the Central Arkansas area, University of Central Arkansas, did my bachelor's and master's down there. Spent the first couple years of my career down there, and then had the opportunity to move to Chicago most recently. So I'm currently in Chicago, back in the Midwest, for the last 2.5 years or so, and that's kind of been the most recent spot for me. So um, from a I don't know, personality and business standpoint, I suppose, I was heavily influenced by my early entrepreneurial ventures. So I can remember the typical lemonade stand, childhood adventures like that. Really enjoying those, but at some point kind of had a hunger for even more than that. I think my dad was teaching us how to mow the grass and do basic landscaping, and it dawned on me that maybe I could, in the same way that I earned some money selling lemonade to some neighbors, maybe I could earn some money cutting grass for neighbors. And that happened maybe earlier for me than it does for some. For me, it was at 12 years old. I had the idea, and I'm the oldest of three brothers, and so my other two brothers were implicated along with me because they kind of automatically got implicated on a lot of things. But we had an incredible conversation one Sunday afternoon around our dinner table, I guess lunch table. But yeah, just really talked through the idea at length, parents, brothers, myself, and it was profound and really a moment where my parents felt like it was time to jump, it became a huge ordeal that afternoon because 12-year-old Andrew didn't realize what was involved in all of that. And I ended up in tears, ended up locked out of my house on the front lawn with my parents basically forcing our hands to go and talk to the neighbor next door about getting our first lawn care client and cutting his grass. And in hindsight, I mean, my parents have told us since that they were really, really wondering if that was the best parenting decision. But they also knew fully that that was the moment that we needed to do it. And it was kind of like if we didn't do it then, the momentum was gonna fail. And it was just it was a pivotal point. And so I look back on that moment. I've spoken about that many times, but I look back at that moment as a pivotal moment early on that shaped me and really began a journey with that business that transformed my life, grew me as a person, grew me into the adult that I am now, the businessman that I am now, gave me a heart for entrepreneurship, gave me a desire to see it grow that business, but then also see it grow into other businesses as I became an adult. And so that business basically funded my college, ended up growing it after I took it over from my two brothers at the end of the road, at the end of the time we were doing the business, my freshman year of college, I guess I took it over from them and grew it significantly. And like I said, yeah, just huge funding for college. And then that was really the point of studying business in college was I just want to be a business owner. I wanted to go out and do something entrepreneurial in the world. So maybe I'll stop there. I don't know if that was more detail than you wanted, but that 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 has framed up my adult life significantly. So
No, Andrew, I think that's excellent insight. I think it's so pivotal when you have those moments because, quite honestly, I don't think I had a moment that intense in the sense of actually creating a business out of it. I was more so selling gums and trading cards and selling cards and pretty much selling anything I could find forever. But I don't know if really the
mhm.
idea of being a businessman really entered my thought process, my lexicon until I'd say much later, like a few years ago. More so than
Mhm.
kind of having that idea and desire to go into business. So you go to business, excuse me, you go to college. Are you studying business? Did you declare right away, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, it was a process to figure out what I wanted to do, but at the time, having some scholarships and knowing that getting a degree would be fairly important, at least in the world that I grew up in, just for life. I thought now is the time, now or never. You know, this is the time economically where it makes sense. My parents weren't able to help us with college much financially, and so really at all. And so it was kind of on us, me and my brothers, to kind of figure out if that was the best decision for us at the time. You know, when it all kind of depended on how much we knew what we wanted to do in some regard. So um, thankfully, I ended up deciding to do it and really just thought I'm going to get a business degree, but what is that business degree that's the most practical for business ownership? Let's not get something that's super generic, super general that I may or may not be able to get a job in. Let's get something hyper practical. And so that's where accounting came from, and ended up yeah, just falling in love with accounting. I say that. I question that sometimes, I guess. Falling in love language is a little bit of a stretch, probably, but I will say it clicked. My accounting one professor, Professor Young, shout out to her if she's listening ever, uh, at University of Central Arkansas. She was fantastic, and that was accounting one. I think that would have been my second semester in college, I think. And yeah, she just gave me a love for it, gave me a deep understanding of it. And she was one of those professors that everyone hated, but I loved and thought the world of her. She ended up being my advisor the rest of the time and had an impact on me because then I ended up deciding to specialize in accounting, seeing a vision for that even as an entrepreneurial venture down the road, which actually happens to be somewhat where I am right now, but ended up doing the normal course of things. So bachelor's in accounting, and then oftentimes people will either get a second master's, or I mean a second bachelor's or a master's. So I ended up getting a master's in accounting as well, and then from there you oftentimes will go into what they call public accounting and get your CPA. And so I did all that, and yeah, that was my early college decisions and then early career, I guess. So
Well, Andrew, I'd say a tip to you that you did something hyper practical. I was the exact opposite. I got 2 degrees in history and just kept making it up as I went. Thankfully, it ended up working out for both of us. But
Right.
what happens once you get those degrees? You kind of did exactly what you're supposed to. Do you then go on and get your prototypical job then?
Yeah. So I actually had the opportunity to get a small public accounting firm job while I was in college, and so I ended up selling my business, my landscaping business, and needed another job to make ends meet in college, and wanted to get something in my field, and so went to the accounting department. This is for those out there who are listening who may be in college and want to get something early experience wise. I was shocked. I was shocked at the opportunity it was to go to my accounting department and say, hey, do you know anybody in the area who might be looking for a motivated, driven, accounting student for I'll take out the trash. Like I will literally take out the trash if I need to. I just need a little bit of money and I'd rather work on an accounting firm for minimum wage than at Walmart for minimum wage, like that kind of thing. And so as a sophomore, I think midway through my sophomore year, I cold emailed a few firms, and one of them reached out to me, and we had a couple meetings, and they ended up offering me a job, $13 an hour, so it was even better than minimum wage at the time. And from there, I worked there for 2.5 years in college, part time, and so that paved the way for me to get my first full time job out of school at a regional firm, Arkansas-based regional firm out of Little Rock, and from at that point, when you graduate from an accounting program, oftentimes you're going to go into what they call public accounting and get your CPA. You'll either go a tax specialty route, or you'll go an audit specialty route. And so I ended up going to be an auditor for 2 years, which basically just means, making sure that a company's financial statements are fairly correctly stated, and there's reasonable assurance of that, essentially, and that report that an auditor would give to the financials would go to places like the bank or external stakeholders, investors, people who need to know that the finances of an organization are correct and fairly stated. So, yeah, so that was 2 years out of school that I was involved in that, and then went in a different direction from there. So,
Out of curiosity, and maybe this is just more of a personal question, what are some misconceptions people get about auditors?
mm, that's a great question. Great one that I feel like I've gotten some version of that in the past as well. When people think auditor, I think immediately what comes to mind is the IRS, like the IRS being the government and being the tax related type of auditor. No one wants to be audited. Everyone hears audit and they think, oh my gosh, I got audited. This is the worst thing that could happen to me. And what they have to realize is there's many different types of audits. You can use the word audit as even a general term, but when it comes to what I was doing had nothing to do with tax, nothing to do with the IRS, nothing to do with the government. I suppose you could say that there was a little bit of association with the government, depending on if the government required one of these audits to be done. But usually, it's the bank or it's an external investor that requires one of these audits to be done. And yes, we have to put on our hat of sometimes being the bad guy and coming into the org and saying, this is deficient, this is wrong. Like we are definitely being what they call professionally skeptical of what's going on in the organization. However, we also have some degree of being on the side of the client and really trying to make the audit process as seamless and as easy as possible for the client. And so it's a very routine thing in the way that we were doing it, and it's more of a financial statement audit as opposed to a tax audit. It doesn't have anything to do with the tax. So that's, I think, the most important thing for people to understand. When someone talks about being an auditor, oftentimes they're actually not an IRS auditor. They are there for a purpose, and there are regulations and rules that require many bigger companies to have an audit done, and it's just a routine thing that happens literally every single year. And there's a report that gets made and some recommendations that are given, and they pay a large fee and we leave. So it's about how it works.
I appreciate that. I've obviously heard some versions of that, but I always like to throw that out there too, because I think sometimes, especially as business owners or new business owners, we hear these buzzwords, and originally I didn't know what they meant other than the big scary, the music stops. It's the auditor. But as I did more
Right.
research, you learn there's a wide variety, just like in any kind of field of those kind of that kind of work. Take me
100%.
take me through a little bit more once you get that. I mean, you went from kind of your more typical job. You kind of seem like you're on a pretty specific path per se. What got you to where you are now?
Yeah. So I would say it's been an interesting journey, and I think, as I may have expressed to you in prior conversations, I started out thinking one thing in at the beginning of college, which was I'm going to be an entrepreneur one day. I'm going to continue this business ownership track. I'm going to go to school for something that is hyper practical, but practical towards something, and that something is business ownership. And I think I kind of drank some Kool-Aid a little bit, and I want to say from the jump, I don't regret where I ended up, and I don't regret the path that I've had, because I think every chapter has an important part to play in my overall story, and I think that it's all going to be helpful, and it has been helpful as I move into the next chapter of life. But I would say that um, I came out of school and just kind of went the path that everyone does, which is, you don't have much experience. You just go and you go into the public accounting space. And had I had more self-awareness, I think I may have come back more quickly to the entrepreneurial side of me. And I just didn't have that knowledge at the time. But essentially, what I did was spend 2 years as an auditor. What is interesting about public accounting, and if you talk to anyone else who's been in public accounting before, what they'll probably have to say is it can be very grueling, and it can be very much a bit of a meat grinder, depending on where you are. But in most cases, the accounting industry is so short staffed, and the work itself is fairly stressful, and full of deadlines. And so there tends to be a large percentage of people that have some degree of burnout, or just get their experience and leave and go to something a little bit easier. And so that wasn't too far from my story. I definitely had a pretty crazy burnout situation in year two, realizing that it just wasn't the right job for me. Not to mention that we were just working pretty insane hours during busy season, which is about a 3 month period, and we'd be working, I say insane. I mean, it wasn't crazy, but it was probably like 60 hours or more at times. And for 60 hours doing work that I did not like, and work that was not my speed. If it was work that I did enjoy and work that I felt like was in my wheelhouse, I think 60 hours would be fully doable. I worked 60 hours easily these weeks, as I'm doing what I'm doing now. But it was just kind of a square peg round hole situation for me, and compounding that with a lot of stuff, a lot of learning curve, a lot of stress, a lot of stuff that I didn't really want to be doing. So ended up, I say, burning out really from that. Actually had some health problems. And as I know, if there are CPAs out there that are listening who have experienced that, they're going to resonate with that. I was just talking to someone else actually who had a similar experience and had some health problems too. It's sad. It's a sad state of the industry. But anyway, took a month-long sabbatical, had another job lined up, thankfully, but ended up moving into another pseudo public accounting role, but on the tax side. And so I started working with a wealth management firm, an RIA, a registered investment advisory firm, based out of Atlanta, but it was fully remote. And so from that was kind of my next chapter. We served exclusively Chick-fil-A operators and corporate staff across the nation, which was really fun. Tons that I learned there. Really was a huge part of um, building a tax service line into an integrated wealth management firm that was really in its infancy when I joined. It was about a year or two in, and I was the employee number 3 on that team in the tax department. And so was really able to see a lot of growth in 2.5 years personally, but also as part of the firm, as we integrated that service line into the broader offering of financial planning, wealth management, investment management, 401k, those types of things for our clients. So we served about a fourth, at least a fourth, maybe a little bit more than a fourth of the Chick-fil-A population across the nation. So many states covered, and yeah, just a wide range of experience. So I can talk more about that if you want, but that's where I was most recently before I jumped off into the unknown, as they say. So
So I got to ask a little bit about that because that sounds like a pretty interesting
sure.
job. You're number three kind of person on that team. You're doing work with Chick-fil-A. You see it grow. I want to ask what made you then decide to jump off because I think a lot of times when people who haven't jumped kind of that's the moment they scratch their head and kind of look at you sideways sometimes because it's like, well, he has a really great thing going for him. Why did he decide to do this?
Yeah, such a great question, and one that I was asking myself so much as I made that decision. I yeah, I mean the some of the greatest things that I had being at that firm was, and some of the greatest lessons I learned were around team culture, team health, um, doing business with a people-centric approach, prioritizing emotional connection, prioritizing, yeah, joyful service is how I would describe it. Like it's my pleasure to serve you. You know, that kind of Chick-fil-A ethos was just baked into our culture. Our founder, one of our founders, had a 20-year career at Chick-fil-A corporate at the support center in Atlanta, and he knew everybody, and that's part of the reason why we were able to be so successful so quickly as a firm. But I had come from a firm as an auditor that was not healthy and was not, a culture that was particularly different and particularly um, positioned toward growth, personal growth for the employees and a people-centric environment. I had mentioned the meat grinder approach. I mean, that's just very typical of the accounting industry. It's like the firm I worked at wasn't real different than most of the other firms. That's just kind of the culture of what we had. But walking into Panda Wealth was like a breath of fresh air. That Panda Wealth was the name of the firm, the RIA, the Chick-fil-A firm. And I just was taken by that, and I pinched myself many a time in that 2.5 years, going like, how did I end up here? Like this is so great, and I was growing so much. I learned so much about myself. They really invested in training and developing you as a leader, and had really close connections with my team and the leadership team. So I continue to feel, even with all of that going for me, I continue to feel that the job itself was a bad fit, and it was square peg round hole yet again. Even though I worked less hours, I had more flexibility. I worked remote. I was able to move across the country to be closer to friends that I wanted to be with in a season in Chicago. Like there were so many things that were incredible. We went on these insane retreats, these company retreats, like full expenses paid for, like Montana, Big Sky, Montana. Went dog sledding and skiing and all these expenses paid trips and whatever. It was insane. Not to mention, I was approached as I was leaving with some opportunities that would have potentially put me on a fast track to partner, potentially put me on um, a leadership opportunity to develop another service line there, to develop a marketing arm that we were thinking about, potentially even do some of the same stuff that I was doing. That's essentially what it was. Same stuff that I'm doing now, but under their umbrella with their blessing and support and backing. So that would even include like a podcast and different things like that. So all of the forces were really pointing me in that direction of like, why you are crazy to think about leaving. Like, how could you do this? And I remember, I'll never forget the decision point when it came for me at that place. Um, my CEO, who I remain close with to this day, the CEO of that company, he had invited me to take our conversations a little bit deeper because we were in continual conversation about my future there and what I wanted to do and a role change and these types of things. And he was like, if you want to come, sit by my pool, swim in my pool, and sit by the pool and chat about this at my house for 3 days. Just come on down. He lived in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, and so I bought a flight, bought a ticket, flew down there, and for 3 days hung out with him and his family. He's got 3 kids, lovely wife and family, like just in a big house on a lake in Canton, Georgia. Unbelievable experience. And I sat there and I talked to him. We talked it out. He introduced me to some of his entrepreneurial friends around, and he gave me both sides of it. He said, "Here's the entrepreneurial side of it. Here's what you would think about doing if you were going to go out on your own, and here's what I could potentially offer you. Here's what we can talk about the future at Panda Wealth." And I've never had somebody take that from a business perspective, like that much interest and like a personal developmental connection like that, mentorship, whatever. It was insane. And the last, we talked it out for 2 days straight. The last, we're both pretty intense people, so we had a lot of good conversation. But the last day, I remember waking up and we were out on his lake kayaking at sunrise, and it just dawned on both of us. He realized, as he had talked to me all weekend, I guess it was during the week, so all week, he realized he was speaking to someone who was like him, that had to go out and start something on his own. And he realized, he realized that now was the time for me, that it was a window of opportunity for me that potentially would close soon, at my age, and it was just a great time to take a risk. And we both came to that conclusion about the same time, and he ended up giving me his blessing, and the rest of the leadership team was on board with that as well. So they gave me a couple more months of being able to work for them before I ended up leaving. But yeah, unbelievable the way that he trained me up for 2.5 years. His team trained me up for 2.5 years, and then was okay with me pursuing the next chapter of my highest and best, even if that meant a loss for them. And I just see that as such a culture of that firm, and really a culture of the broader connection we had to the Chick-fil-A brand. But it's a wealth management firm, or a people development company disguised as a wealth management firm, just like Chick-fil-A is a people development company, a leadership development company disguised as a chicken company. And that's what I experienced, and really what I hope to replicate as I build my own firm. So
Yeah, Andrew, it's one of those testament to not only you but your boss as well. I mean, to kind of have that level of humility and understanding, I think is incredible. And I think, I mean, and he knows this as well. You're never going to talk ill about him or that company, probably ever, because of those experiences. Where maybe somewhere else, as an example, there's many meat grinders in your field that you don't need to name them by name because anyone who's in that area kind of understands that. And to have that kind of
right.
stick out, I think is crucial, especially I think for yourself, and I realized for myself, you could have done it. You could have stayed there forever. I have to laugh because I was at the Chick-fil-A College Football Hall of Fame, and so it was
Yeah,
it was literally the same kind of thing. And eventually, you realize, and I don't know if I had as much support per se in that instance, but it was one of those things. I also didn't really know 100% where I was going yet, but I think it's one of those things. I would way rather, and now you look back at 10,000 times over 10,000 times, I do it the same exact way because at least now you know. Now you're learning. And there's never going to be that seed of regret because the thing you'd hate is, you keep growing with there, but I think there would always be that little bit back your ear. Maybe no one else even hears it or even thinks about it except you when you're like, what if I would have done this myself? Where would I be now? I mean, maybe worse, but I think sometimes it's that art of
totally.
not knowing is what I think gets us as entrepreneurs to want to kind of keep figuring it out and keep kind of opening up those doors to see where they lead.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, I will not be on my deathbed wondering whether or not I could have done it or not. I'm finding out as we speak. So
So on everyone's excuse me, on everyone's path, they make a decision not really knowing the outcome. Can you give me a time where you just went for it?
yeah, I would point to that moment actually. I know I've spoken a little bit already, but I mean just to give you a little more context, it was very interesting the way the decision and the timing all worked. But I had made that decision in June of last year at my CEO's house in Atlanta area, and gave me another couple months as we talked about it, as I mentioned. And then during that time, part of the reason why I was going to stay on a little bit longer was I was staying on till the end of tax season. But then too, I was going to have hip surgery. I had a hip repair that was long overdue, and I needed to just have a little bit of stability in that point, or for that initial recovery. And so ended up, yeah, having my initial recovery and being able to have a stable job, while that happened. But then I guess it would have been mid-September. Ended up leaving, I think, about a month early than what I had planned on leaving, but everything just kind of aligned. And September 15th, give or take, was when I left Pando Wealth, and that would have been September 15th of 2025 last year. And for the last 7 months or so, I have been um, doing two things really. One, building a future focused accounting firm, and also working on a podcast, which we've alluded to already as well. So that's really, just as I was explaining to someone today, actually, it's just been the next stage of my self-discovery journey. And I consider this first year in particular really a part of a greater interview process that I'm doing of myself and of others in the industry, to continue to discern where I fit in the world, what is my unique gifting and calling. And I'm getting there, and it's exciting. I think the accounting firm is a natural leap, because I have experience there. I have a lot of expertise, a lot to give, and I can explain more about that as well. But the podcast has been exploratory, and it's been super fun as well. So cool to see. Um, it is an adventure, and it is unknown, and you never really know what will happen. I could end up on my parents' couch, but it's been a blast. So
Andrew, I love to hear that. Title the podcast "Into the Unknown." You're talking about the firm. Can you tell me a little bit more about the firm, and of course, more about your podcast and what made you jump into a podcast?
sure, yeah. Well, I will start. Maybe I'll start with the podcast just briefly. I would say that I've always had a knack for conversation and asking good questions, and just a curiosity. I think the curiosity really birthed. Curiosity was there first, and then over the years I've gained conversational ability and better communication skills and different things like that. But it just seemed like a natural, enjoyable fit, and something that I've always been a consumer of podcasts. There's been several that have been really influential to me over the years, and I've always thought, I guess, in the back of my mind somewhere, like it would be really fun to create something like that for the next generation. And so the podcast really, both enterprises really have to do with my love for entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial process, and inspiring the next generation of entrepreneurs. So that's really what the podcast is geared toward right now: entrepreneurs and leaders of the next generation.
What's it called?
But the other thing about, say again, sorry.
What's the podcast called?
The podcast is called Cook's Table, and actually, it goes back to the story that I shared a couple minutes ago, which was about the table conversation that changed my life, around that dinner table on a Sunday afternoon at age 12, when I started my first business, and learned learned that I can do hard things, and go and face my fears and pursue something that will pay off in the end. So yeah, it's just this heart to have authentic, curiosity infused conversations that will inspire and encourage, empower. But the other thing about podcasting, and we've talked about this a little bit, but I think content is the way of the future, and is a huge engine for business growth. And so I've really enjoyed utilizing podcasts as a tool for personal brand building and awareness of what I'm up to. And so I still have yet to kind of link it back to my accounting firm. I hope to be able to do that in the future as I continue to grow my audience. But yeah, it's just it's such a tool, and I've seen firms really put a lot of investment early on in the content, and then have a incredible sales funnel that comes from that. So that's what I'm hoping with the podcast as well. As far as my accounting firm goes, I'm building a hands-on, CPA-led, full-stack outsourced accounting department for businesses, really with the goal being helping business owners have better visibility into their numbers, their financial situation each month. It's such a pain point for many entrepreneurs who are not accounting minded, or maybe don't have the financial background. Oftentimes they don't want to spend the time doing it. They don't feel equipped or qualified to do it. And potentially their local tax CPA that they've used for years isn't giving them, is more tax focused oftentimes, and maybe isn't giving them the level of visibility into their numbers on a monthly basis that they could be getting. And so that's where my firm comes in, really to address that pain point: is how can we get timely, accurate, frequent check-ins with the numbers of a business. And that looks like a custom reporting, but a lot of the operations and systems on the front end that go into that as well, and taking responsibility for that. That's why I call it a full stack outsourced solution. So it could be all the way from processing bills on the lower end of things, to bookkeeping, to systems design and tech implementation, to the end all the bottom line of the reporting, whatever the reports look like and need to look like, and the KPIs and that type of thing. So um, yeah, it's been really cool to see how that is a need. It's a felt need for so many, and excited to continue to leverage technology in particular, um, to really build systems that are efficient and effective for these entrepreneurs.
Well, Andrew, as we close out, where can people learn more about you, your story, where you're located online, on social media? Where can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, currently, I'm really leveraging LinkedIn, and so people can find me on LinkedIn, Andrew Cook, CPA. I think that's what my name is on there. I am on other platforms. I'm not as frequently on those other platforms, and have been more in the past, but not so much now. Hopefully, I'll come back to those platforms with enough margin. I've just been so busy and tied up, and in a stage where I don't have a lot of margin to pay someone else to do it yet. So we'll see. But those other platforms, oftentimes it'll probably be at Real Andrew Cook, Instagram, TikTok, some of these, but it'll have just a bunch of old videos on there. So maybe stick with LinkedIn if you're on there, and then trying to think. My podcast is on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. It would be the Cook's Table podcast. Those links are all on my LinkedIn as well, if you want to reference that. And yeah, I would invite anyone to reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a cold message. I'll definitely respond. Would love to connect. So
Cool. All right. Well, as we close out, I just wanted to say thanks again, man, for taking the time today. But it's been great to get to know you over these last few weeks. And I think I don't know if I've spent more conversation with many other people the last few days, or excuse me, last few weeks. I think we spent about 3-4 hours together.
well, it's certainly been a pleasure, and I look forward to continuing to follow your journey and be alongside you in whatever way that looks. And I really appreciate you having me on today. So
We'll talk soon.
talk soon. Sounds good.
Another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.